listening to Hotel Bar Sessions, the podcast where three philosophers sit down at the end of a long conference day to chop it up at the hotel bar, which, as we all know, is where the real philosophy happens.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome back. After a short break, we are back with season 15 of the Hotel Bar Sessions podcast. I'm Bob Vallier, and I'm here with my dear friends and colleagues, Leigh Johnson.
Hey, Bob.
And Jen Kling. Hi, Leigh. Hi, Jen.
Hello.
As usual, we have another exciting episode. This one's going to be about intelligence. But before we get started, we're going to do what we usually do, and that's order drinks. And we're also going to do something different this time. Instead of choosing musical selections, we have something else. So, Leigh, what are you having to drink?
I think I'm just going to have a hot toddy to warm me up tonight. And I have an interesting, kind of odd fact that I would like to share with both of you that I just learned. And I learned this from a guy on TikTok who I follow who does this series, Things That Shouldn't Match But Do. And it's basically a causation correlation kind of thing. It's funny. And it turns out that the popularity of the name Jessica corresponds with reports of UFO sightings. So all you Jessicas out there, I want to know what's up.
I have so many questions. Oh my gosh.
All right. Well, hopefully we don't have too many Jessicas listening. And if we do, beep, boop, beep, boop. Jen, how about you?
Hey, friends. I'm going to go ahead and have a gin and tonic today because I'm just feeling drinking something nice and clean that goes down easy. And I also have an interesting fact this week. I'm really liking the new Pope. Full disclosure, not Catholic, but I follow religious and political news. And I learned that the Pope cannot be an organ donor by Vatican law, which I think is just really interesting. And I think that would be a cool thing to talk about in a bioethics class.
Yeah.
Well, holy replacement liver, Batman.
Exactly, right? He's not allowed by Vatican law. Bob, how about you?
Well, I think I'm going to have something rather simple today. Just a glass of red wine. I think a nice, rich Burgundy, because that's just the way I'm feeling. And here's my piece of odd information. I learned the other day that you can burn as many calories by having sex as you can by running 5 kilometers.
Whoa.
Very
I
nice.
think that's very impressive. Of course, I don't know anybody who can run 5 kilometers in 37 seconds, but this is a good comparison.
It all depends how we define sex, doesn't it?
Yeah, seriously.
All right. Well, those were some fun facts and some odd oddities. Leigh, this is your topic this week, intelligence. So what are we going on about today?
Well, you're right. Tonight's topic is intelligence, and I want to start by hazarding a definition that I will admit is still a work in progress. But here goes. I think that intelligence is the capacity to navigate a domain in a way that solves problems and accomplishes goals. So for humans, that often looks like the ability to figure things out. But for non-human animals or machine intelligences, it may not look anything like human-style, quote-unquote, understanding. There are many flavors of intelligence, and on my view, whether we're talking about humans, non-human animals, plants, or machines, intelligence can manifest itself in different ways. It can sometimes be rational, as we typically think of in human animals, sometimes embodied and environmentally attuned, as we might see in non-human animals or plants or rivers and mountains, sometimes microscopic and improvisational, as with viruses, and sometimes oriented entirely by algorithmic pattern recognition, as we see in machines like AI. In each of these cases, what I want to call intelligence is more like the capacity to move effectively through a domain than it is the capacity to articulate a theory about the terrain through which you are moving. So if I'm right that intelligence is the ability to solve problems across domains, and in many cases, the ability to orient yourself within a domain structure well enough to act effectively in it, then I think it's not only fair, but correct to say that some beings are more intelligent than others. That's not to say they're all equally intelligent in all domains, but some possess the capacity to orient themselves in more domains than others. And the key word there is orientation. It's not just about output or effect. It's the way an agent, whether that's a human, a non-human animal, a natural being, or a machine, is capable of finding and responding to the givens of its environment in a way that makes sense relative to what it's trying to do. Why should we care? Because intelligence is never just a description. It's also a ranking device that has been built into our moral sensibilities since the very first iteration of the ancient Scala Naturae, the great chain of being, which mapped for us who or what counts as capable, who or what gets trusted, who or what deserves moral attention. Measuring intelligence has never been neutral. It's always been an argument about what we value. So we're going to do 3 things tonight. First, we're going to ask what intelligence is and whether it's one thing or many. Second, we're going to ask not only how we measure it, why we compare different intelligences and what's at stake when we do, but whether we're justified in doing so. And third, we'll try to think about human intelligence, non-human, animal, and natural intelligence, and machine intelligence in more productive ways that don't assume humans are the only real benchmark, but also don't collapse everything into it's all just information processing. If at least one crucial part of intelligence is about navigating a world toward ends, the question becomes whose world, whose ends, and who gets to decide what counts as an intelligent solution. So listeners, pour yourself a drink, but only a light pour this week, please, because we want to keep our wits about us.
Yes, we don't want to impair our intelligence ahead of time.
All right, well, welcome back, listeners, and welcome back, Jen and Bob. It's good to see you for a brand new season of Hotel Bar Sessions. We're back here at the bar talking about intelligence today. And in the introduction, I kind of hazarded a working definition where I basically said that intelligence is domain navigation towards ends. That's not exactly what I said, but something like that. And therefore can't really just be reduced to human style understanding. So I'm wondering, what do you make of that definition? And if you don't like it, what's yours?
Well, I like it to a limited extent. And part of that extent has to do with my own philosophical biases. I spent most of my philosophical career working on Merleau-Ponty and thinkers associated with him. Most people think of Merleau-Ponty's first book as The Phenomenology of Perception, but that's not true. His first book is called The Structure of Behavior. And in it, he spends a lot of time thinking about, to be a little bit reductive about it, animal bodies and how animal bodies behave or navigate their Umwelt, their surroundings, their environment. And then he rewrites a lot of that in the first part of the Phenomenology of Perception to give us the sort of, I would maybe in this context characterize it as a general bodily conception of intelligence. So for me, with that prejudice, this is a very good working definition that applies to all living beings, I would say. But then if we're going to get into the question of scales and degrees, et cetera, we got to begin to talk about what separates human intelligence from animal intelligence. And there you need, I think, something additional beyond this general definition.
So I'm always suspicious of the notion of intelligence. I like your definition, Leigh, but it strikes me as sounding more like rationality than intelligence per se. Because it says it's the ability to problem solve within a domain, the ability to have an end and then work towards that end, which I would understand more like something like rationality. It's instrumental. Whereas I tend to think of intelligence as something broader, but maybe I'm misunderstanding. Bob spoke about his biases. I'm also biased about the notion of intelligence because I come out of feminist philosophy and philosophy of race, where intelligence has been used historically to denigrate certain classes or groups of people. And so my temptation always is just to push back and be like, there's no such thing as intelligence. That's not what we're talking about. We can get more specific.
Well, a couple of things. First, I want to clarify that I absolutely was not trying to craft a definition of intelligence that prioritized rationality. As a matter of fact, that's what I was trying to avoid doing. And so when I say intelligence tonight, I'm not talking about being able to explain yourself. I'm really talking about how one moves through different domains towards different ends effectively. And that can be in the form of problem solving, rational problem solving. But I think there are a lot of other ways that different kinds of beings have a certain intelligence about the domains in which they find themselves and in which they operate. But on that second point about measuring intelligence, and we're going to talk more about measuring intelligence in the second section, but I'm a little hesitant to say that just because a particular category has been used nefariously in the past, that we just get rid of it altogether. I mean, the fact that height, for example, or beauty has been used to distinguish people from one another and value some more than others doesn't mean I just say, well, there's really no such thing as height or there's really no such thing as beauty.
I appreciate that. I just am wondering if there's something general we can claim, because you're trying to give a unifying definition. And I think I would be tempted to just give more specific definitions about each of the different kinds of things we're talking about, rather than trying to subsume them under one categorical understanding.
Well, then I suppose my rejoinder to that would be, whatever definition you give, you'd have to show me how it isn't subsumed under the definition that I'm giving.
I think this is a pretty broad and general conception as well. I mean, we're talking about a general capacity to solve problems. And if you have a broad understanding of what problems are, I don't have 99 problems and this is not one of them, but just survival, right? Survival is a problem. So crows and ravens know quotation marks there, how to use a stick to push a piece of food out of a narrow tube that they can't get their beaks into. Spiders, quote unquote, know how to weave a web in a location that's going to attract a good deal of food. How do they know these things? Well, it's about navigating their environment. It's about understanding their Umwelt and maximizing use of that Umwelt in a way that maximizes their potential or their capacity to survive. I think that's problem solving.
I think this is a good point, Bob, and it goes back to what I feel like you were trying to indicate in your reference to Merleau-Ponty, basically that intelligence doesn't have to just be something like an internal representation to a mind. It can live in bodies. It can live in habits. It can live in environments. It can live in attunements. And so if we're going to make consciousness or language the entrance fee for intelligence, I think we're always going to end up with the problems Jen is pointing to. If we make consciousness or language an entrance fee to intelligence, well, that's just really, at the end of the day, human vanity, dressed up as philosophy, dressed up as intelligence.
So I'm always glad to take a potshot at human vanity. But my concern is that if we say intelligence is the ability to navigate a domain in order to survive, then everything that is alive is intelligent.
Yeah.
Then we've just made intelligence mean aliveness or ability to surviveness. Maybe that's what we want to say. I'm just wondering if we want to make the word intelligence mean something more specific than ability to survive or being alive.
I mean, I don't have any problem saying that everything that is alive is intelligent, and I might not even have any problem saying that everything that is capable of persisting in its own being expresses a kind of intelligence or exhibits a kind of intelligence. I think where the specificity is going to come in is, what do the different kinds of intelligence look like? We can make those distinctions without saying there's no such thing as intelligence, also without denying that all things that persist in their beings are intelligent in a way.
But then I just don't know what the word intelligence is doing, because I just say, yeah, it's alive. And then I can say, okay, what kind of intelligence does it have? But if you're just saying that to be alive is to be intelligent.
I'm not saying that living is the same thing as intelligence. They're different. If you asked me to give you a description of a living thing, I would give you a different answer than if you asked me to give you a description of an intelligent thing. However, if you're asking me, do I think that all things that live are intelligent? The answer is yes. That's not to say that they're the same thing, though.
Maybe some distinctions need to be starting to be introduced here. I think all living things do have some form of intelligence, and that form of intelligence does have something to do with maximizing survival, not only of the individual creature, but also unconsciously of the species. Intelligence at that level can be both or either blind or not blind. If it's blind, then it's probably maybe instinctual. So there's like an instinctual kind of intelligence that serves the purpose of the life drive. animals don't necessarily have to reflect on what they're doing or calculate what they're doing. They have immovable instincts that just simply drive them to do those things. But, the paramecium or the amoeba, when it encounters something toxic in its environment, it doesn't know that it's toxic. It will move to engulf it, to digest it. And it turns out to be poison, it will try to expel it. If it survives that, the next time it encounters that chemical signature in its environment, rather than moving to engulf it, it will move to avoid it. This is what Nietzsche means by the will to power. It's a power to increase life.
I just want to tag on here, and I'm not sure that this is the exact point in the conversation to get into the weeds about this, but I also would say, or at least for the possibility that some non-living things can exhibit intelligence as well. But we'll get to that later.
So that's where I wanted to go, because I wonder if it would help to introduce the idea of non-alive things that can be intelligent. So in your introduction, Leigh, you mentioned things like mountains, rivers, and machines. And it might be helpful to talk a little bit about those, because I'm still struggling if to be intelligent is to have the capacity to effectively navigate a domain, whether it's with meta-awareness or blindly, as Bob points out. So we say that the amoeba is intelligent in a way. Then I'm still struggling to understand what the distinction is between an alive thing and an intelligent thing. Maybe it would help to talk about non-alive things that are intelligent, unless we want to say that machines are alive, and mountains are alive, and rivers are alive, which maybe we do.
I definitely don't want to say that machines are alive. I might want to say that mountains and rivers are alive, but that's not something that I've got a fully enough formed thought about right now to say. But if I could just use the river example, because I think water does exhibit something that looks like an intelligence. If you've ever seen these videos, it happens on a beach when there's like a lake next to the beach and they break the dam basically of the lake and the water finds its way to the ocean. And it's a way of draining out these bodies of water that are beachside. I think that it would be hard to not say that that appears to exhibit the kind of intelligence that I'm talking about. That water has a way of navigating its environment and understanding what it is to do. I mean, and I'm using, again, understanding in a non-anthropomorphic sense. It's just, I'm not a water. I don't know what water would call what they do, but it does appear to exhibit a kind of intelligence. And the same way with mountains and forests and trees. I mean, they do, well, trees are sort of more obviously, I guess, alive, but I do think that they seem to exhibit a way of, as I said, orienting themselves to their domains. And I mean, figuring things out, I guess. I mean, again, it's just so hard to talk about how it is that they persist in their beings without using language that sounds like human rationality. But I think actually intelligence is a good word to use here. If we allow for the possibility that it doesn't have to look only like rationality, then intelligence is a good word to describe how these things operate.
I can't tell if we're getting caught up in the difficulties of our language, famously always a problem for philosophy, or if the problem is coming from this really, really broad notion that we've got going on of intelligence. I'm still a little suspicious of this because, yes, water will go downhill. That's because of forces like gravity and entropy and things like that. I don't know that I want to describe the water as intelligent. I just want to describe it as existing in the world. And things that exist in the world are going to navigate domains. That's what it is to exist in the world. I think I want to say if intelligence is going to be a separate concept, it's got to be a little bit sharper than that.
But now I think you're falling into the trap that you laid out in the beginning. So my question to you would be, what is your investment in not calling it intelligent?
Yeah.
Because it seems like you do have an investment in saying that is not an intelligence. And what human beings do is a kind of intelligence. Now we're back to the problem of the great chain of being.
No, that's not what I'm trying to claim. I'm just trying to make the concept sharp so that intelligence and existence don't mean the same thing. I'm not particularly invested in any particular kind of intelligence, but I think we might do better to just say intelligence is a weasel word. It's way too broad. We should just talk about different kinds of intelligences and sharpen.
So I also had some qualms about the claim that water manifests some form of intelligence. Because like Jen, I thought, well, that's just physics. Basically, it's physics and the mechanics of waves, etc., responding to a terrain that's already there, responding through physical forces, not through any sort of navigation of its environment. It's just responding to the physical conditions that are present. So I started to wonder if maybe physics is like a transcendental condition in which something like intelligence in living beings, at least, has to operate.
I mean, I'd take that as a friendly amendment. I just, again, want to ask what the investment in saying that it's not intelligence is, because I'm sure I don't have to remind either of you that what we're now saying about rivers is what people used to say about women and non-white people and some non-human animals. And we've come to understand that once we broaden our understanding of what intelligence is, that there are all different kinds of intelligences that manifest in ways that don't easily map onto how we think of human intelligence. My question here is sort of the same question I have when people talk about AI in general, like AI self-awareness. And by the way, I don't think that AI is self-aware. But why not err on the side of the broadest possible category? Why not err on the side of the broadest possible understanding of intelligence? That seems like a better option to me than later finding out that I've been calling something unintelligent that in fact is intelligent.
But I think there you're doing the thing. You're pointing out that like we use intelligence as a value category and you're just accepting that. And you're saying, I just want to call everything intelligent so that I can value everything equally.
Yeah.
I think I want to do the opposite. I want to say intelligence was always a crap way of determining value. So stop doing it. Say things that exist have value, and then different things have different attributes and different capacities. And we can talk about those specific different attributes and capacities without having to lump them under this concept of intelligence that we know historically has been used in all these very bad ways. I'm happy to say that mountains are valuable, that mountains exist. We can go into indigenous philosophy and say that mountains are beings. I'm happy to say that. But I don't think that has to commit me to the claim that they're intelligent. Rather just throw out the concept.
So you just don't want to call anything intelligent, including human beings?
I want to say that different kinds of beings have different capacities and attributes. We could call those kinds of intelligences. But intelligence as a broad umbrella category, I'm not sure it's helpful.
I don't think that you're saying anything different than what I've been saying. I've been saying that there are many different kinds of intelligences. I'm trying to give a definition that would help us better understand non-human intelligences.
I appreciate that. I just don't think this umbrella work is helpful because capacity to effectively navigate a domain is so broad as to just be almost meaningless. We would do better to just talk about the different kinds of intelligences rather than try to do this big definitional work, I think.
I mean, this is just a basic philosophical question. How can you talk about different kinds of intelligence without a definition of the conceptual category? What are they kinds of?
Yeah, just different kinds of capacities or attributes, right? So you're claiming things that exist in the world have capacities or attributes. And I'm saying, for sure. Then what is the capacity? I don't know why we have to call that intelligence.
Well, first of all, I agree that things in the world have different capacities and attributes, but I was giving a definition of intelligence and specifically saying that intelligence is a particular kind of capacity, which means something like being able to navigate a domain or multiple domains, perhaps to problem solve, perhaps to continue persisting in one's being, whatever. I mean, I think there are different ways to describe that, but I've said something dramatically different than things exist. When I say this is what intelligence is, I'm giving a definition of what intelligence is, and I'm allowing for the possibility that there are different kinds of intelligences, which I think you're also allowing for.
Yeah.
But I don't think that we can identify the different kinds, much less understand the different kinds, without having some umbrella category to work with to identify them as kinds.
Hey there, dear listeners. You know, everybody agrees that the best time of the conference is after the conference is over and we're all hanging out in the bar having discussions. It's our social hour. And speaking of being social, you should be following us on social media. You can find us on Blue Sky, YouTube, and Facebook. And in all three of those places, we're at Hotel Bar Sessions. So please follow us on social media and keep the social hour going.
So in the last segment, Leigh and I got into a bit of disagreement about, as Bob says, the classes of classes. How do we classify the overall class that we're talking about? And I take Leigh's point here that we need to have an umbrella category so that we can disseminate it into subcategories. I think my concern was that the minute we do an umbrella category, we have to take on the whole history of the concept of intelligence, which, as has come up a couple of times, has a very patchy and concerning history, especially in philosophy. So I think this gives us a good way to talk about what I'm really concerned about, which is once we start calling things intelligent, then we start measuring how much intelligence they have, and then we start categorizing them as more or less worthy of attention.
So a couple of things. One is, I think I agree with you that once we start talking about intelligence, then we can start talking about beings that have different kinds of intelligences or kinds of intelligences that are operative in multiple domains or more expansive domains.
Mm-hmm.
So when I describe the difference between the intelligence of a virus and the intelligence of an adult human being, I would call an adult human being more intelligent, by which I don't mean that it's smarter than a virus, but only that it is operative in more domains. Its intelligence has a broader applicability. It has a greater facility for navigating environments and attuning itself to the world in which it finds itself. So I'm fine saying that some things are more intelligent and some things are less intelligent, but that's a matter of breadth of intelligence and not, intensity of intelligence.
And that breadth is demonstrated by what? By the ability to operate in multiple different contexts, by the ability to imaginatively vary the use of an object or the use of a context. Humans can do that. Maybe higher order primates can do that. It's not clear that other animals can do that. It's not clear that a river can do that. But, what we're doing here is now compounding the sense of intelligence by sort of saying there are some beings that are, quote unquote, more intelligent just because that capacity, that general capacity, is broader, more multiple, more variegated in its operation than some other beings' capacities are.
Yeah.
Jen's worry, though, is, I think, a very social, political one. Anytime we start classifying anything, there's always going to be social and political implications. Even the very beginning of classification with Linnaeus and the scientific classification. Originally he had 4 kinds of human beings. There was Homo sapiens europaeus, Homo sapiens africanus, etc. And those came with moral evaluations. Same thing is true with intelligence. We start talking about intellectual intelligence or emotional intelligence or social intelligence in the human animal. And the next thing that happens is that these kinds of humans have more of that kind of intelligence and less of this kind of intelligence, etc. We begin to hierarchalize, we begin to compartmentalize, and we begin to use that as a way to criminalize, to marginalize, to exclude.
Yeah, I want to stipulate all those concerns. And I think when we're talking about one very specific kind of intelligence, namely what we most closely identify with human intelligence, that has a very sketchy and worrisome history. I want to say, however, that I am much more inclined to use the categories of more and less intelligent or intelligent in different ways than I am the categories of intelligent or not intelligent. I think that we can admit that there are many different domains in which intelligence manifests itself and many different beings that are more or less capable in those domains, but you're not always going to be able to measure those intelligences against one another in the same way that you can't measure a shark and a cheetah, right? I mean, if you put a shark and a cheetah on land, the cheetah is going to look more intelligent. If you put a shark and a cheetah in water, the shark is going to look more intelligent. It's hard to even think about what would be a fair intelligence test for an octopus or a crow or even a large language model. And even harder to think, how would you measure that intelligence against a being that has an entirely different kind of intelligence? So again, I'm not saying that these measurements are not rankings and that they cannot be deployed nefariously, But that is not to say that there isn't a value to talking about different kinds of intelligences, some of which we might call more intelligent, not because they are the best at that kind of intelligence or that their kind of intelligence applies to everything else, but because they have multiple different kinds of intelligence.
All I'm thinking about now is land sharks, so thank you for that. So then I think the question becomes, how do we understand different domains? And how do we categorize them? Because Bob is right. I can't get myself out of the sociopolitical worries. And so now I'm just thinking it would be perfectly easy for somebody to say, Leigh Johnson is exactly right. There's the domain of business, and there's the domain of the household. And in the domain of business, men are just more intelligent. And in the domain of the household, women are just more intelligent. That's wonderful. We should just have the more intelligent person in each domain do their thing. I think that's a trap.
Yes, that is a trap. There's a different way to think about that as well. There is a kind of intelligence in the business world. And it's probably the case that most of us as academics do not possess that kind of intelligence. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make us better or worse than business people. That just makes our skill set different.
And also, even within the business world, there are going to be men and women who have more business intelligence, more intelligence for that domain than others. And that, is not to say men are always going to be more intelligent than women. I mean, men are going to be more intelligent than some other men, and some women are going to be more intelligent than some other women, and some women are going to be more intelligent than men in that domain. I think that we can see this pretty easily in the different domains in which human beings navigate, which are, again, so many and so multiple and so varied that I am inclined to say that human beings are more intelligent than other kinds of species. Your claim, Jen, that I agree with, is that whenever you rank intelligences, you're also smuggling in some kind of a moral ranking. I absolutely agree with that. My worry, though, is that is most evident when we are invested in claiming that some things are not intelligences and other things are intelligence. While your worry is about the more and less intelligence, my worry is about the intelligent-unintelligent distinction.
I also think there's a second worry, though, which is how do we determine domains? Your shark and cheetah example is helpful. Sort of land creatures and water creatures, that's a pretty easy natural domain difference. Mm-hmm. But I think when we get into the social world, the domains become actually very, very hard to parse out. Bob mentioned academics, right? Now I'm thinking about academic smarts and street smarts. Mm-hmm. But how are we carving up those domains? Because academia is not fairyland. It's part of the real world. But when I say the difference between book smarts and street smarts, everybody kind of knows what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. But those domains aren't clearly demarcated. So now I'm wondering about the demarcation problem.
I don't think there necessarily is a straightforward, thick line of demarcation. It's quite porous, actually. So, some academics do have street smarts. Some street people are actually very academic in some ways. In the human world, I think there is a porousness and a translatability among domains where you can move, maybe not necessarily freely, but with some degree of freedom from one to another. A word that comes to mind here is code switching. When you're in an academic context, you're using 5-syllable words and constructing sentences carefully and trying to look smart in various ways. But you have that exact same conversation in a street setting, and there's not going to be any 5-syllable words. There's going to be a lot of 4-letter words.
Even in the distinctions between different domains of human intelligence, we've gotten a lot of really good things come out of making those distinctions. I'm thinking of the immense amount of recent material that we're getting about neurodiversity, material that we've gotten about how certain humans struggle with social intelligence, struggle with political intelligence, or even struggle with navigating their own natural world or their own natural environment. And those are helpful. They help us understand, for example, where we need help. That I'm not concerned about. I mean, I think the problem, and again, I absolutely agree with you, the problem is that when we start ranking intelligences and putting certain kinds of moral weights on certain kinds of intelligences and saying, well, people who are book smart are better than people who are street smart, or people who are neurotypical are better or more intelligent than people who are neurodiverse. That's, of course, problematic, but that is a question for another day, right? That is not a good reason to throw out these very useful category of different kinds of intelligences.
What this underscores is that these different kinds of intelligence, I mean, we'll call one sort of intellectual, one emotional, one social, etc. We can probably come up with several more. But somebody who is very intellectually intelligent can be very, very poor in emotional intelligence. In fact, that's a pretty common combination, I would wager. What that shows us is that whatever it is we're calling intelligent, it's a composite. It's not a single thing or a single dimension. It has multiple dimensions to it. And an overall composite intelligence still, I think, relates to the basic premise, the basic overarching umbrella definition that Leigh gave at the outset, that it's a capacity or a multiplicity of capacities to navigate the environment, navigate your environment toward some end.
So I think the moral problem is one problem, and I appreciate that everybody's on board with that problem. I was actually trying to raise a slightly different issue, which is that Leigh, taking your position that to be intelligent in multiple domains is to be more intelligent, then we have to be able to demarcate the domains in order to determine who is more intelligent and who is less intelligent. You're exactly right that that's what I'm concerned with. I'm concerned with the more and less intelligent, especially because we live in a knowledge economy. And so if we're going to be able to say that some people are more intelligent just on your understanding of intelligence, then we have to be able to demarcate the domains, throwing out the moral concern, which I agree is a concern. If we can't demarcate the domains, how can we measure who is more and who is less intelligent?
Well, a few things. I think that we just evidenced that we can relatively easily demarcate domains. And I also just want to add that when I say something is more intelligent, I am not using that in a quote unquote knowledge economy sense or a knowledge economical sense. When I say that something is more intelligent, I'm saying that it is able to exhibit intelligence across multiple domains rather than one very specific and relatively limited domain. Now, I agree with you that at the end of the day, the domain choice and the domain demarcation is always going to be a power move. When we say different domains and we compare them to one another, that's often going to tell us more about the tester than the tested, right? So if there's somewhere, down the street, a flock of crows having this exact same conversations with each other about the different kinds of intelligences of different kinds of beings,
God, I hope
they
that's
might
true.
be using tests that make us human beings seem rather unintelligent. Same with the whales, same with the cheetahs, same with the mountains, right? We have the capacity for language. And so the way that we make these measurements and mark out these domains is going to be tilted towards our own prejudices, our own intelligent ways of understanding the domain in which we share a world with all of these other beings. So I'm not saying that that doesn't mean that there are going to be being-specific prejudices at work. But I think that I can avoid some of the bigger problems with that when I say more intelligent, in my view, means just a capacity that a being can exhibit across more domains than another being.
Now I'm just imagining crows dunking on humans. I'll have to get back to you.
I'm sure that they do. I mean, we do actually have an example of this. I mean, you can have a conversation with, for example, ChatGPT about this exact question. And ChatGPT is going to give different answers about how to think about humans' intelligence compared to other natural beings or to machine intelligences. Now, you might say, well, it's only going to just give us back what it anticipates or predicts a human being would say in a certain kind of language model. But I think that's a little bit of a reductive understanding of how these new neural network, deep learning language models work. But still, same thing applies. If you try to ask ChatGPT about, for example, its bodily experience or its emotions, it is going to admit that it does not have the capacity to talk about those things intelligently. That's what it's going to say. And I think that we agree that that's true. If I ask a shark or a cheetah about its social world or its moral sensibilities, it's also going to say by not saying, because it doesn't have a capacity for language, or at least human language, it's going to say it doesn't have those kinds of intelligences. Now, that's going to reflect more on me expecting it to answer my question in language and ideas. But I think that the domain question is not as much of a prickly pear as I think you're making it out to be.
My concern, and the reason I keep raising the domain issue, is because I'm worried that we're waffling between a descriptive project and a prescriptive project. A descriptive project is to say, what is intelligence? What are the kinds of intelligences that we see in the world, and how do we measure more or less intelligent? A prescriptive project is to say, here, when I set the domains, then I get the result I want, which is that certain kinds of beings are more intelligent than other beings, and then I go on to do a lot of things. I'm just concerned that we're going back and forth here.
I really appreciate that. That is a absolutely hugely helpful contribution, and I can say confidently that what I'm doing is a descriptive project.
If you're enjoying Hotel Bar Sessions, come find us on social media. We're over on Facebook at Hotel Bar Sessions Podcast, YouTube at Hotel Bar Sessions, and Blue Sky at hotelbarpodcast.bluesky.social. We're sharing episode updates, extra bits of commentary, and the occasional philosophical musing that didn't make it into the show. Following us there is a great way to stay in the loop, and more importantly, to join the conversation. We genuinely love hearing from you. Your questions, your critiques, your wild hypotheticals. So don't be shy. Give us a follow, say hello, and pull up a seat. We're always happy to have you at the virtual bar.
Well, welcome back. We're having a really rambunctious conversation about different kinds of intelligence, what they mean, and how they relate to one another. One thing that we're trying to move away from is the idea of an intelligence on a scale or a ladder from, higher to lower. This creature, this person is more intelligent than that creature or that person for these reasons. Away from that and toward what I called earlier a complex, and what Leigh has called earlier an ecology of intelligence. Different forms of intelligence fit in different worlds and in different ways. So that intelligence is no longer a monolithic thing based on rationality or mere human existence, but something much broader. So let's get back into it. What is an ecology of intelligence consisting of?
I think I would say the way that you just described it, intelligence as fit, is a really good way to describe what I'm thinking of as a kind of ecological intelligence. So intelligence as successfully being able to cope in one particular domain. I've been thinking since the very first segment about Jen's claim that I was equating intelligence and existence, so that just anything that exists is intelligent. And I think that although the latter is true, I do believe that anything that exists is intelligent. I don't think that intelligence and existence are the same thing. However, I also believe that to continue existing is evidence of a kind of intelligence. In human beings, just to pick a very limited domain, for human beings, the fact that a human being continues to persist in its own being is evidence that it has figured out how to fit in some way in the environment in which it finds itself. And of course, we know there are terrible conditions in which human beings find themselves and are somehow able to intelligently navigate that condition, that environment, that domain in order to keep persisting in their being. For some, that might involve a very high form of emotional intelligence. For some, it might involve a very high form of social or political intelligence. Or in others, it might involve a high form of like book smarts, right? Like academic intelligence. But all of those are going to evidence that the human being has been able to find a way to fit and to cope and to navigate, to be attuned to its world in a way that I think you cannot describe with any better word than intelligence.
So I really like this idea of an ecology of intelligence, where you talk about different forms for different worlds, and then you talk about intelligence as fit. I would want to add something like intelligence as the ability to generalize from one world of fit to another world of fit. I'm reminded here of María Lugones, who talks about world traveling. She thinks this is an attribute not only of humans, but also of some non-human animals, that we can world travel. We can figure out how to fit in different worlds. And I think I would want to add that to the descriptive discussion of intelligence that I've now figured out that we're having.
Yeah, and there are some worlds in which I am never going to be able to find a fit because of the kind of body that I'm in. And that's where I want to go back to my claim earlier that bodies also have a certain kind of intelligence, right? I'm never going to have the intelligence of a shark or a root vegetable because I can't live in the water or under the ground. My body doesn't have the intelligence to navigate that domain intelligently and to continue to persist in my being in that domain. I cannot be a shark or a turnip.
Speak for yourself. You can do anything you put your mind to, Leigh.
I don't think I can exist on an island all by myself. I think that human beings are fundamentally social animals and that social intelligence is not only one form of intelligence that human beings exhibit, but is actually necessary for human beings to continue to persist in their own being.
That's right. We're definitely social critters. I do think that this raises an interesting question, though. If we move fully away from the valuing notion of intelligence and move to this idea as intelligence is fit within a world, intelligence is adaptation within a world, and we acknowledge there can be different worlds, then I'm interested in thinking about machines. Because machines, do they have bodies?
No.
They have casings. Are they embodied in the way that we are?
Not in the way that we are.
I didn't mean that specifically to humans. I meant broadly.
Have you seen that anatomically correct robot of Henry Cavill?
No. I have questions.
Okay, but I think if I could get back to the point here, I think that, Jen, your real question is, can we call machines intelligent? And of course, for many, many years, people said, well, we'll know that machines are intelligent if they can pass the Turing test. And the Turing test, of course, has many problems. That doesn't necessarily mean that machines aren't intelligent. And I would want to say that current machine intelligences are, in fact, intelligent, not in the way that human beings are intelligent, not in the way that animals or natural things are intelligent, and not in the way that embodied things have to depend on their embodiment to manifest their intelligence. But I do think that they're intelligent. It seems like that's your concern, is whether or not we can call machines intelligent.
That is my concern, because if they're not embodied and they're not doing it in a way that we recognize, how do they manifest their intelligence? First question. And secondly, how would we ever recognize it when it happens?
Well, I mean, they do manifest their intelligence already through problem solving, through learning. And, for all the people out there who are screaming at their podcast device and saying, oh, but they're just programmed, they're just following algorithms.
Yep.
Okay, yes. But also, we don't know that we're not doing that too, right? So, I mean, that was not a slam dunk case against calling machines intelligence. But if you're asking how can we see their intelligence, I think there are many ways in which we can see their intelligence and already do. It's not like ours. It's a different kind of intelligence. But I don't think that it's the same thing as a toaster or a chair.
Yeah, and I think maybe we're asking this question too early. We should be asking it in about 5 years, because then we'll have really concrete examples to point to of embodied artificial intelligences that almost appear to be human in so many different ways. Already with robotics, LiDAR, sensors and whatnot to allow robot bodies to navigate obstacle courses, to solve different kinds of, what you might consider to be like, what do you call those? The escape room type problems. We can already see that with a great many different kinds of robots, which still operate almost on a movable instinct level. They're programmed, but they're endowed with a capacity to adapt to their surroundings. Endowed, I mean they're programmed, right? With a capacity to adapt to their surroundings and make adjustments to their course and to their activity in order to achieve whatever end it is they have to achieve. And, 5 years from now, it's going to be even more obvious that these kinds of artificial intelligences are indeed intelligent. And, there's even talk in the artificial intelligence community, people are very aware of this problem and that it could get out of hand, that it could be Skynet eventually. And I, for one, welcome our new robot overlords. But, they talk about kill switches that are already built into artificial intelligence that they can turn off the machinery before it blows up the world unless the machinery figures out how to circumvent that already. And I'm reminded of the character in The Good Place, the kill switch, and she does whatever she can. She screams, Janet, exactly, to try to prevent people from pressing it. But, 5 years from now, it's going to be a different conversation.
I feel like in the AI community, the 5 years from now is sort of like the equivalent of whenever Donald Trump says in 2 weeks. Like it's always, it's coming in 5 years. But I think a lot of the things that Bob just mentioned, we can already see now. I mean, we've already got examples of AI programs that have acted in ways like not simply pre-programmed ways to preserve their existence, to continue persisting because of things that they learned in conversation, in the context. And I think now we're going back to the idea of intelligence as fit, as being able to fit in a certain kind of world and continue to persist in that world.
This is really helpful that machines are manifesting intelligence in these ways. Here, I would want to bring in a distinction that we do when we're talking about human intelligence. And forgive me, I understand and take the point completely that human intelligence and machine intelligence are different. But the only analog I've got is human intelligence, so I've got to start somewhere. But we often say that there's a difference between humans who are learning something by rote, they can memorize and repeat, versus understanding. We say that folks are intelligent when they understand something as opposed to memorize and repeat by rote. I think the more nuanced version of the concern, right, all the people out there who are yelling, the machines are just programmed, it's a kind of memorization. And so I think the more nuanced way of framing the objection would be to say, do the machines understand what they're doing? Or is it, to call back to Bob's point in an earlier segment, is it a kind of blind intelligence where it's instinctive programming, to use a biological analog? Or do they have a kind of meta-awareness of what they're doing?
So there's a number of questions in there, and I want to just try to pick out the most troubling ones. What you're asking is basically just a variation on the very unfortunately named thought experiment called the Chinese room. So when you ask, like, do computers understand? That's the question. Of course, we don't know, but of course, I don't know that you understand or that Bob understands. I can only infer that you understand on the basis of my understanding of my own mind and the behaviors that I see in you that seem to evidence a kind of understanding that I understand that I have, right? So that's an unsolvable question. The problem of other minds, I think, is an unsolvable question. Mm-hmm. But to call it blind intelligence, also, by the way, an unfortunate use of a term, but to call it blind intelligence, I don't think is any more helpful, because we do know that machines learn and we do know that machines adapt. So they're not like calculators. They're not simply spitting out answers that are already very tightly programmed or that don't require any additional learning in order for them to complete a task. Now, when Bob was talking earlier about the advanced robots that we see, like the dog robot from Boston Dynamics, those are AI-enabled machines that have, bodies, I guess, that definitely have bodies, but have learned how to navigate obstacles, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not as if the robots are programmed in advance with all of the obstacles that they're going to encounter in a room. In fact, they have to fall over a lot. They have to trip. They have to run into things and eventually learn how to navigate that environment, learn how to intelligently adapt or fit in that domain. That to me is, see it with your own eyes kind of intelligence. And I think that I wouldn't call that blind intelligence. I would call it adaptive intelligence. I would call it fit. I would call it the ability to, again, figure out the best way to navigate a domain so that one can persist in one's being.
Blind intelligence, I mean to only apply to sort of a movable instinct.
I know.
But it is a kind of intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. And, with robots and AI these days, they're even getting really great at, maybe they're faking it, I don't know, but even kind of an emotional intelligence. So, they have these AI boyfriends now.
Yeah.
I tried them out. So you can select a twink or a twonk or a bear or, you get the whole gay zoo covered in the AI boyfriends. And,
Oh my
you
goodness.
just chat with them and, they're actually really nice. I mean, I would kill for a boyfriend like that. Not really, because I'm perfectly happy being alone. But in any case, they're filling a void for people and they're providing some sort of emotional comfort for people. They can understand if you're depressed or feeling off about something. They offer up the right words to make you sort of feel good about yourself or less lonely or even, dare I say, loved. So this level of emotional intelligence that's starting to emerge in AI, is it just programming? Is it fake? I don't know yet. But in any case, it is an interesting development.
And again, for all the people who are shouting at their podcast device and saying, oh, no, they don't actually possess emotional intelligence. They're just mimicking what looks to human beings like human emotional intelligence. That's true. But you know what else does that? Your dog and your cat and you.
That's right.
You mimic what looks like emotional intelligence to other human beings. And so
That's true.
To say that, they don't have like emotions or whatever, that's not to say that they're not exhibiting a kind of emotional intelligence.
Mimicry itself may be a form of intelligence.
It absolutely is a form of emotional intelligence, yes.
Mimicry and play. Because I watched the Boston Dynamics videos too, and they're playing. They're playing around in the space, which I think is just so cool. So my question is, what follows? I accept machines are intelligent in a machine intelligence-y kind of a way. And then they are likely becoming intelligent in other kinds of ways, right? In other kinds of domains, just to call back to our previous segment. What follows from this conclusion? Okay, machines are intelligent in a machine intelligent-y way. So?
Well, for me, I think going all the way back to the beginning, if we accept my general definition of intelligence, including all of the supplements that have emerged in this conversation over the last hour, I think that actually kind of takes the wind out of the sails of the very terrible ways that comparing intelligences can be used. So I think that it opens us up to a broader, more expansive, more inclusive way of thinking about the beings with which we share the world and which have their own kinds of intelligences and navigate their own kinds of domains in intelligent ways. And that makes us less inclined to use intelligence as this kind of battering horn to beat down the things that don't morally matter and artificially lift up the things that also don't really matter.
I really like that. Cosign. I'm on board with that project.
I would add to it, and this is maybe just a variation on the theme, is that it really helps us better demarcate what is specifically human.
Yeah.
And to understand what is specifically human, as opposed to merely animal or viral or machine or anything else. But, for centuries, the argument was always, oh, what makes us human is that we have language or that we know how to use tools.
Or that we're free.
Never thought we were free. But
yeah.
In any case, all of those things that have been used to demarcate the human from every other form of being have been obviated. They're no longer applicable. We're aware of the fact that we're going to die. I think that remains a pretty potent one. But machines, they might know when they're going to be turned off pretty soon. So that'll be interesting as well.
Okay, so maybe Hotel Bar Sessions podcast is not NPR, but like NPR, we are also not receiving public funds anymore. Actually, we never received public funds. We have always been supported by you, our listeners. And to keep this podcast going and to keep our bar tabs open, we need your help. So please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/hotelbarsessions and sign up to be one of our regular supporters. If that's a little bit too much of a commitment for you, no worries. We've also got options for one-time donations that you can make through PayPal, Venmo, or Cash App on our website. Just click on the Support Us tab at hotelbarpodcast.com. Every little bit that you can contribute helps defray the costs of what we do here and helps keep our Hotel Bar Sessions tab open and your Hotel Bar Sessions episodes flowing. Thanks in advance. We really appreciate your support. And now, back to the conversation.
All right. Well, the person who's most intelligent here is probably the bartender. And she's telling us that it's time to go. So we need to wrap this up, unfortunately. It's been a great conversation, and it's one that could go on for hours more. But we do want our very intelligent bartender to be able to cash out, counter tips, go home, and have a lovely evening. So we got to call it quits for this episode. We'll be back again next week with another exciting episode. But for now, we wish you all a good night and a good weekend.
Thanks for a fantastic conversation. See you later.
Good night.